All right, office hours for today. We're covering these topics. So who wanted to know about IIFEs? Cool. So you want to know when a good use case for an IIFE is? The most common use case for an IIFE is if you're writing some JavaScript intended to run in the browser, and you want to give yourself a place to define a bunch of variables that aren't global variables, right? So if we just made like a static site, and in here we've got an index, HTML, and JS, and then we'll do, we'll serve this static site, and in our HTML, we will link to this script. And in here, let's make sure this works. Great. So we load this page and it loads that JavaScript, right? So when I'm writing a bunch of stuff, like I want to be able to say like, you know, document.query selector and go get something, right? And store it in a variable, right? By doing this, I'm creating a global variable. If I just put it empty in the file. This is different from Node. When a blank file in Node, you can think of it as already being wrapped in an IIFE. In that, if you just define variables like this, they're local to that file in Node. But that's not true in JavaScript in the browser. If I just load a file, a very simple load just like this with a script tag, and I do const thing like this, I'm actually going to define a thing global variable. And you don't want that. You want to limit the global variables that you define to like 0 or 1 basically. You just want to very much minify your global impact, because library, and this is more for libraries that you write. Like when if we were going to write a library like jQuery, it would be crazy if that thing defined like hundreds of variables that were available in global scope, right? So they define one global variable called jQuery. It's actually two, jQuery and $, right? But we don't want them defining like thing and counter and index as these global variables, right? So we want a place to put them. So what we do is we create a anonymous function, right? So this is an empty anonymous function, right? This is actually illegal syntax if you don't assign it to something. You can't just do this. You get this weird, it's just a syntax error. You just can't define functions like that. So you have to wrap it in parens, and now you can have an empty function that just is on its own, right? So then you put some code in there. So we'll just put this code in here, right? And then you have to execute that function. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So that allows us to then run this code and no longer have thing as a global variable. So that's the standard case for an IIFE. There's other cases in which you want to be able to, again, just create yourself a block, basically, just a place to put local variables. And that's really what it's for. Is that any questions or around clarity around this?
So when you actually want a global variable, why would you not just put everything in the IIFE to start?
So I would put everything in an IIFE to start off anyway, and then if you wanted a global variable, you would just say like window.thing equals thing, and now you can explicitly create a global variable.
Yeah, so like when would you actually want a global variable? I guess what's a good example of?
Yeah, so for example, let's say this script is meant to add like a slideshow to my web page. I'm creating a dedicated slideshow JS, right? I might want to come in here and have some local variables, and then at some point I might say, I might create like a class, or rather a constructor. And so maybe I'm in here and I've got like some private function, you know, some example of a private function down here that's, again, not global. And then at the very end, I say, okay, now I'm going to expose slideshow as the one thing this file exposes to the outside world is this slideshow object, and everything else is sort of private. This is as close to private as we're going to get. And now all these variables are private variables, except I've exposed one of them as slideshow, and now I can use that. And maybe you want to put some extra things on there, you know, some helper method or something like that. But like I'm still just at the end of my file here, just exposing one thing. And then that name is unique enough to where I know that I'm not stepping on some other thing, right? So I can name something really generic and then choose what becomes global.
You made slideshows global by making it an object on the window?
Yeah, the window is a tricky object in the browser. So in the browser and in Node, there's these objects that represent the top level object, right?
Window and global, right?
Window and global, yep. So that's going to create a global variable called slideshow. Cool. So forms. Let's make a form. So I've got, in order to do that, I'm going to need an Express server. So let's just make that really quick. In which case we don't need this anymore. And so I'll make a little Express server.
Whoever created that plan.
I can never remember what is it, like URL encoded.
Yeah, I think it's lowercase.
Like that?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see if that works.
Like true or false.
Huh?
Like extended, like true or false, and then that.
Extended. Yeah. Extended.
God. Typing is hard. Okay.
Jared,
Yes.
extended false versus extended true.
We,
False allowed you to pass in arrays.
no, extended false is just standard query strings. Extended true is like this extra bit of syntax put on top of query strings to let you do like nesting and define objects and arrays and scopes and stuff. You can look it up in their docs. Yeah. We don't need it for this. So. Localhost 3000. I'm installing NodeMon and as a development dependency. I feel like I do this every day. Every day.
I'm not feeling on that.
What's Node Dev?
This new one that he showed me just now.
All right.
It just says like notifications when your service is starting.
Sounds awesome. I'm kidding. Okay.
I don't like it.
Response.send. And I'm just going to do HTML like straight in this thing, so I don't have to set up a templating thing, but y'all can understand, I think. Great. And we don't need this. And hell no. No, I love React, but not for this. It takes too long to set up. Okay, let's put an H1 in here. Is that working? Great. Okay, so we need a form. So action is just where that form is going to go. So let's call it like sign up. And then method is what HTTP method it's going to use. So we'll tell it to do a post. And we'll put any number of form inputs in here. So inputs need a type. So we'll do a text. And they all need a name. So this will be email. And then they can have an optional value, which you can put in there. And then you can also give things placeholders.
What's the difference between the value and placeholder?
Placeholder is only shown on screen when value is an empty string. So you'll see in a second, this will be a password. and it'll be called password, and it'll be placeholder password.
Once you hit submit something that's a value, that value can pass through.
I understand like value is just on it has it filled into the space by default.
A placeholder, when you hit submit, nothing goes through.
Gotcha.
Okay, so here we have a form. Here is the rendered DOM tree for this form. It's a form. I don't know where that, oh, this came from frickin' LastPass. So this is because I have a Chrome extension installed, right? So I'm gonna just do incognito. And now I don't have that Chrome extension. That's a trick I like to use. So cool. So here's our form, and it's got a text input, a password input, and a submit input. These both have names. If they didn't have names, they would not be sent to the server. So we're gonna do a submit to a post to /signup. So that's what I'm gonna say my route needs to be, app.post to /signup. And all I'm gonna do in this post is I'm going to respond with the JSON version of the request body. And this is a trick I like to use just to see, like, is my form submitting what I expect, right? So if I come in,
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
yeah, this is a trick that I like to use as I'm developing a post route, because all this is going to do is render the data it was given. So I'm going to submit my form and see exactly what my form was given, or my form gave to the server. And we'll walk through it all. So bob@bob.com, password Bob, sign up. And you can see that this JSON object represents the data that the server received. Email, bob@bob.com, password Bob. And if we look in the network tab, we can look through this request. So this was our post request. Here are the request headers at the bottom. We sent a post to /signup, and the form data that we sent, if we look at the raw source, was a URL encoded string of our email and value and password and value. And then we told it that the content of this post is a web form that is URL encoded. We told the refer and a bunch of other stuff, right? So the server received a request that looks like these headers followed by this body. And we needed body parser to take this string and turn it into an object with keys and values, right? It actually internally uses a package called query string, QS. And QS has a parse function, I think. And if we were to give it this string, it would parse that and give us back this object.
That's what query string does?
That's what query string does.
Wow.
Query string would also take a JavaScript object like this. This is a real object, right? And you can say query string.stringify this object, and it'll turn it back into a query string, right? So, what's up? Yeah, well, that's what, well, I don't like to write these libraries. They're there for me, so I'm going to use them. So that's what body parser is doing when you say query string. And you should look at the source of body parser and see how it's doing that. Cool. So that's posting data to the server. We could do all kinds of stuff here. We could create the user, all kinds of stuff there, right? So any other questions about posting to the server with a form? Yeah.
Would you recommend to use QS?
As opposed to, I think QS is built into Node. I don't think it's an actual module or Node module, or rather, I don't think it's an NPM package. I think it's built into
Yeah,
Node.
you just have to require it.
You just have to require it. Yeah.
So if you were using Postman and you put in key value pairs into the body as opposed to
Yeah, if we were using Postman, you get to, I think Postman wants to know, like, you give it fields and values, you fill out a dynamic form basically, and then it'll turn that into the, whatever type of post body you want, URL encoded or JSON or raw or whatever. And so this forms by default, forms existed before JSON was invented or discovered or whatever. And so this is all URL encoded. Does that answer? Whose question was this
That was
around? Huh?
That was mine.
Okay, great. You good?
Mhm.
Sweet. All right. True and false versus truthy and falsey.
I can try to investigate.
Okay, so in JavaScript, we have these objects called true and false. And we can, those are called Booleans. There's even a constructor called Boolean. I think you can even make a new Boolean. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but basically, true and false in the JavaScript language are used to represent the concepts of true and false. So we'll get back, does 1 equal 2? We'll get back false. Does 1 equal 1? We'll get back true, right? So they're commonly used to just evaluate whether or not statements are correct or not correct, or true or not true, right? So we can do things like if 1 is equal to 2, then console log A, else console.log B, right? So we all would expect that to be false, and therefore it would go to the else, and this every single time. This is a static expression, right? This will never be true, and so we will always log B. Okay. So what happens if I say if 45? That's not true or false, right? 45 isn't true or false, it's 45. But what will it be interpreted as? Will it be seen as true or be seen as false? And this is where the concepts of truthy or falsey come in, right? So does anyone know, is 45 truthy or falsey? It's truthy, so it's gonna, which one's gonna log, A or B? A, right? Okay, so we have both literal true and literal false, but then we also have every single object inherently is either true or false. It's in truthy or falsey, right? And we don't always know what those are, and it's actually a little weird in JavaScript what those are. Let's find out. Negative 45 is still a truthy value. So the way you can figure out if something is true or false is by doing a double Boolean like negation, right? So if we have true, we can do bang true, and bang true will give us false. If we do bang bang true, we'll get true because we'll swap to false and swap back to true, right? So same thing. If we want to know is 45 truthy or falsey, we just double negate it. Put 2 bangs in front of it, and you'll see whether it's true or false. So negative 45 is considered truthy. However, 0 is considered false, right? So this is how you discover if something is truthy and falsey. This is also how you just turn something into a Boolean, right? Why is 0 false? So this has to do with the quirky things around JavaScript came from the inventors of that language, of this language, trying to make it as quote unquote easy as possible to use. So they made these, they built in these different sort of defaults to try to make things easier. So for example, when JavaScript was built for the web, so for example, if we're pulling out data from this input, right? Let me go back to this other page. So if we grab this password input here, which I'll get by just doing $0, ignore that. If you don't know how I got that, ignore that. But we have an input, and I can get its value, and its value is an empty string. So let's say I store that into a variable, and now I want to know, is there a password, right? So if password. So password's an empty string, so empty string is actually considered false. And I think the reason why they did that is because inputs never give you a null or an undefined or a false. They're going to give you either, it's always going to be a string. So I think that's probably why they decided, okay, if it's empty, then we'll call it false because there is no value in there. But it's a little bit weird from a strictly programming standpoint where, like, in most other languages, if you have a string as the value of a variable, it doesn't matter if it's empty or not. That's a default truthy kind of object. But not in JavaScript. Empty string is falsy. This is actually the source of a lot of bugs, right? Because sometimes we just want to know, like, is this null or false or undefined? And we want, as opposed to containing a string, we've got to be careful because the empty string is false. Another weird one is that's true, even though this is false. It's just, there's just some quirkiness in there. There's a really good book called JavaScript, The Good Parts by Douglas Crawford that goes through some of these quirky things and how to make sure you kind of have healthy practices to avoid these bugs that come from this kind of thing. So there are some weird defaults in the language, but we can talk about Booleans, truthy, and falsy without having to cover every single one of those cases, because you yourself as a developer should take any value and put 2 bangs in front of it and make sure that you know whether that's truthy or falsy.
So it's just about like if there's a value at all that is not undefined, right?
Well, okay, so what's truthy? If there's a heuristic for it, it's like anything that is not undefined, null, false. I think nan is also false, which means not a number. There's a bunch of them, right? Empty string, 0. There's probably more than that. What about an empty array? That's considered true, right? So
Jared, I posted I gave you on Slack an image, a diagram that does all.
there's a diagram.
Yeah, all the things that are truthy.
Okay, cool.
So that's like the triple equals operator.
So cool. Interesting. I don't understand why this is a table though. Like, how do you compare like is like is -1 equal to 1 and that's false? Is that what that means?
Yeah. So if you look at the
So
other
the
diagram,
string
it's-
true is equal to the string true. Oh, there's another one?
Yeah, that's essentially that one above it.
Oh, this
is-
one.
Yeah, that's the truthy diagram.
Interesting. So there are guides out there like this. I've never seen this before, so I think I'd have to digest it for a second. I think this is just an intersection diagram of like, if you triple equals the column to the row, what answer you would get.
Oh, this is for double equals. This is.
Oh, this is double equals versus this is triple equals?
Yep.
Okay. Well, what I'll leave you with is that you should be able to ask the computer these questions, right? Yep. And this is, again, a source of a lot of bugs in your program is you think you should be getting one Boolean value and you're not, and you're getting a different one, right? So there's a lot of, there's some lessons to be learned here about like double checking things like if we have this password, we might want to, instead of just if password, we might want to say if type of password is a string and password dot length is greater than 0. So I would rather write this than just write if password. And that if password is a shorthand for this because it means is it not an empty object or a null object or an undefined object, and is it greater than, so like write things out longhand. Be explicit about type checking and any other characteristics that you care about on your, and that'll save you some bugs, I think.
Don't you have to do type of?
I do, yeah, that's a typo, sorry. Yeah. And you could do it, you can use it as a function too if you want. Doesn't matter. Cool. Any other questions about truthy and falsy? No? Sweet. One thing I see folks doing, something like this, well, they'll say like, if x triple equals true. This stuff you never need to do. If this equals true, you can just say if x, right? You never really need to use a literal true or a literal false unless you need to explicitly know. So for example, if x is 1, x is considered true, but x is, and you could do double equals true, but I don't think you can do triple equals true because x is truthy, but it's not exactly the true value. Does that make sense? It's not literally true. It's just truthy. Does that distinction make sense, right? So sometimes you're writing your code where, you know, you're supposed to give me an options hash and you can put an options object and you can put like, you know, colorize true or false. And I want to know whether you gave me the actual true value or the actual false value as opposed to leaving it undefined, right? Does that make sense? So if we've got P, which is undefined, this is considered false, but what if I want to know, is P actually the false? And that's false. So P is falsy, but it's not actually the false value. So there's a little bit of trickiness in there. Play with this. If you don't feel like you've got this internalized and this feels quirky to you, sit and make assumptions, right? Write down a bunch of expressions like this and just guess, like, what am I going to get? And if you get the wrong thing, dive into that and figure out why your intuition was wrong. It just takes drilling, I think. Cool. What else we got? Array filter. Cool. So array filter is basically a way to say, I have an array of stuff, and I want to get a subset of that array. I want to get some of that stuff based on some algorithm. Okay? So for example, if we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I want to get all odd numbers, right? So I want to get half, little less than, or it would be exactly half these numbers, right? I can do that by just saying filter, and then giving filter a function that when run for any one of these values will tell me if it's even or odd. And it will give me back some Boolean, some value that filter will look at in a Boolean way, right? So, and if it's truthy, it'll keep that item, and if it's falsy, it'll throw that item away. Okay, so we can give a function to filter where we say, give us one of the members. I'll call it n since we're dealing with numbers, and I'm going to return if n is an odd or an excuse me, if it's an odd number. So how do we know if n is an odd number? Modulo 2. And modulo 2 is going to give us either a 0 or a 1, right? And which one is it if it's going to be odd? It's going to be 1. So we'll say if modulo 2 triple equals 1, and we should get back all the odd numbers. And if I switch this to where the Boolean value is only true if they're even, I'll get back all the even numbers. Yes?
So is this the array, is that a like modification of the original?
No.
Or is it a new array?
No. If I do numbers, filter does not, the vast majority, in fact, if maybe even all of the array methods, no, definitely not all, there's slice and stuff like that, but the vast majority of the array methods are just going to return new arrays. Cool, so we've got numbers, and we'll say numbers, and we'll say evens.
Numbers.
Thank you. And then numbers is still the same array. Yes.
Yeah, I was using the filter method, and like, it just seems like it's a lot different when you use string versus number.
Nope, the filter method does not change depending on the value of the type of the members that you have. We can have any sort of members that we want.
So you could do that, like the array being an array of string.
Absolutely, yeah. If we had numbers and, well, how about we just do another one? Let's do colors equals red, yellow, ruby, green, and I don't know, reddish. I don't know. Cool. And so we wanted all the colors that start with R, right? So filter, we'll give it a function. This is the shorthand version of the function, color equal color arrow.
I mean like in terms of like the parameter that you pass.
With the parameter I pass to filter? Yeah. All you ever give to filter is a function.
No, but I mean like
the parameter that's passed to the function, that's just going to be each individual member.
So can you do in there?
What do you mean?
Like,
I can put anything I want here. It does not matter what this is called.
Iterator, the index.
Filter is meant to run that function on each member in the array.
Yeah, but I can call this X. I can call it underscore underscore X. I can call this whatever I want. Nothing outside of this function can even know what this is. So I can just call this thing, and then I'll just return true. I'm not even going to look at thing. And it's just going to give me back every single element. If I return false, it'll give me back no elements, right? And then if I do something like, let's say, anything where the length of this string is less than 4, right? Versus less than 6, right? So you're able to, now let's break this down, right? This function right here on its own is just a function that takes a thing, looks at its length, and tells you whether or not that's less than 6, and returns true or false, right? So on its own, this method can look at any value that has the string property and tell you whether or not that property's value is less than 6. Yeah?
In the case of this function being passed to filter, is Filter is iterating, right?
Yes. Yeah. So filter looks something like this. Filter is a function that takes, I'd call it like, I don't know, this is the given function. So this is the, we'll just call this the checker, because this is going to check whether or not we keep it or not, right? So this is an array, just the way that this works. So this we do for each the member of the array. And here is our new array that we're going to return. And then we call the checker and we pass it the member. And we say, if this returns something true, then we push that into, oh my God, I cannot type. Otherwise we don't, and we return the new array. Right? So that's what filter's doing, is it's just saying, you give me some function that tells me yes or no when I give it one of the members of this array. And I'm going to go through each member, and I'm going to call your function, and if it returns a truthy value, I'm going to push that into the new array. Otherwise, I'm not. Right? And then I'm going to give you back that new array. That's all filters do. There's probably a couple little other very minor tweaky things going on in there around like setting the value of this and stuff, but this is essentially what's going on.
I don't know, it seemed like when I was working with filter, it wasn't working correctly. I ended up having to like set the array to like songs, for instance, and I would have to use like as the parameter like song.
I mean, you get to decide what those variables are. And especially when you're writing an iterator function like this, right? It does not matter what you call this. You can call this whatever crazy, weird variable you want to call it. It makes no difference. Cool.
So what's the advantage of using filter over map?
Map is different. Map works like this. Map doesn't creates a new array, and it, instead of this being checker, we'll call this changer, right? Because this is going to give us a new value, and it pushes no matter what. You will always get back an array of the same size as the array you got before. This just changes the first value to the new value, right?
Right. So map would be like multiply each member times 2, and then we'll return you
Yes,
an array.
map is for when you want to change every element in your array to a new version of itself derived from itself. So add 10, take the number, add 10, right? Filter is going to give you back an array of as many as or less than the original array and the exact same values. You can't change the value, right? So when we filter down colors like this, we get back red. We can't get back a modified version of red.
Okay.
And also with map, can you change part of the array, not the full array?
Can you change part of the array? No, map will always return a new array and leave the original array unmodified. Same for filter.
No, sorry. So the example you mentioned, like I said, add 10 to every
Yeah.
array.
Mhm.
You say like add 10 to only like 5 elements. Like,
Yeah, I mean, you could do tricky things like that. So when we have numbers, right? So numbers dot map n return n plus 10, right? So this was what we were originally talking about, right? You're asking, can I modify only some of them? So I could, for example, so here's my number and here's the index. I could get complicated here and I could say, oops, sorry. And I could say, if the index is less than 3, then return number plus 10. Formatting. Else return number plus 100. So now for the first 3 elements, I added 10, and for the next ones, but you still, however complex that is, you're still saying take every element in this array, run it through this function, whatever it returns, that's the new value of the new array, right? You can get tricky and look at the index. You can even do things like, I think the third thing is actually the full array itself, like the numbers array. So you could even get complicated and say, like, if the next thing in the array is something like some condition, then you know, you can look ahead and look behind, and you can do all kinds of crazy stuff. But that's sort of, usually I've never really needed to do stuff like that. But you could. What's up, Monica?
You could also do something like, sorry, you can't just, like if like a number in the array is even, then have 10 to it. Or
Any conditional at all. Yeah. Any conditional.
just we're wondering, like, if I could do that.
Sure, but you could even do some crazy things like, let's take the full array and index +1 and say if this is greater than 2, then we'll add 10, otherwise we won't, right? So we didn't add 10 to the first two because the next ones were less than 2, right? You can get crazy complicated like this, but again, it still all comes down to, so remember how I said map works like this? Map actually works, now that I've shown you this, we got to get the index from for each. We're going to pass the index and this, which is the whole array itself, right? So you have access to more data there, but usually we just do a one-to-one mapping, right?
Something I was curious about for the filter
Yeah.
method is, like, if you pass it strings. I know one time, like, I had like a list of strings, and then
Yeah.
I passed it a minimum and a maximum, and I said if it's greater than or equal to the min and less than or equal to the max, return it, and it was able to figure out that it wanted me to return it alphabetically. Do you know how
That
it did that, or is
sounds,
that, like,
I am skeptical. So we have colors, these are not alphabetical, right? So sort this thing, great. Okay, so if we did colors, we did a colors filter before where we'll say less than 5.
like I passed it a thing, and then I passed it like a min and a max in the function?
Well, you can't pass a min and a max to the function. You're not calling this function, right? You can't pass anything to this function. You're giving this to filter so it can call it.
No, yeah, I think I mean, like, I did, like, where it says thing, I might be remembering this wrong, but I think I did, like, thing, comma, min, comma, max.
Okay, let's look at filter then, because I
Maybe
don't.
remembering what I did wrong, too.
Created a function that takes in the min and the max and filters the array based on
Yeah.
the min.
Yeah, so filter. So if what I heard you say was you put like some numbers here. Is that right? Is that what you're saying? Like as second and third arguments to filter?
I can look up real fast.
Well, you're saying that, like, you made a new function and then used filter function within it, like, as a nested recurring.
Sure. Well, let's just say we had a min and a max, right? So we want any color whose length is, you know, greater than 3, but then also, you know, less than 5, or less than 6, or less than 7, right?
I mean, what I did is I had, okay.
But you should, I think filter is, I would be shocked if filter didn't give you back the subset of your array in the same order that you gave it.
You want me to, like, I can just.
Sure, yeah, let's
write
look
down,
at it. Let's look at it.
But I did this function right here, where
Sure,
I passed it
filter.
an array and a min and a max, and then it was able to sort alphabetically based on that. And I was confused about that because how did it figure out based on a string?
Send me that, because I think we can, let's prove it. Send me that code in Slack.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's an order.
But he sorted that array prior, right?
No, so dot sort at the end here. Different order, right? Reddish comes before Ruby, so those aren't in alphabetical. This did not. This is the same. So here, let's. Yeah, because it's filtered down greater than 3, less than 7, doesn't include red, right? But here, let's put some other colors in here. So I put a sort at the end there, but without the sort, amber's at the end. So did you send me that
Yeah, I sent it to you. Sorry.
in phase 1 or?
I just sent it to you as a message. Yeah.
Okay, so we have filter between. It takes an array, a min and a max. It goes through the array, asks if it's greater than or equal to the min or less than or equal to the max. Okay, so this assumes like either numbers or strings.
Yeah,
Objects
so,
that can be compared with greater than or less than
Yeah,
will
so
work
like
here.
if I pass it the string
Yep.
A and then the string
Okay,
Z.
so let's say filter between, and we'll just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then we'll say anything between 3 and 5. Yeah? And we get 3, 4, 5. So cool. Those are in order. So then let's jumble this up. What did I get? Oh, it already, oh. Eh. Okay. Did I forget? Oh, I have 2 2s in there. Here, I'm just gonna leave filter between defined and let's see, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, am I good? Great. 5, 4, 3. So it's not sorting them, right?
But when I gave it, like when the array was an array of strings.
Okay, let's
then,
try it with the array of strings. Let's do it. So
Yeah, so I guess like maybe not sorting alphabetically, but I guess my question is how does it figure out that it does this min-max alphabetically? I mean, yes, or like it takes anything that's in between bool and jaguar.
right.
Yeah.
So if you do is cow greater than zebra, it's not. It's less than, because this is just alpha sorting. I think strings compared by less than and greater than are just looking at their alpha sort.
Oh, so JavaScript itself has that.
Yeah, so that's how you sort in. That's how you would sort by alphabetically. Is you would say sort, and then you would take A and B, and you would say is A less than B, then you'd give it 1, or if B is less than A, you'd give it -1, otherwise you'd give it 0. And so that's reverse. So if I just swap 1 and -1, then we get, so I think that, so I still don't think the filter between is doing the sort here, but yes, it is true that you can compare 2 strings by their alpha, and I think it might even be case sensitive, so we might want to downcase these things.
ASCII values.
Is it ASCII values?
Is it?
I don't know. Let's look it up. JavaScript strings compared with less than, greater than.
Something like JavaScript gave compare strings
Yeah.
like alphabetically greater than or less than.
It's basically like funny parts of JavaScript. It's pretty cool because he got all the things to like the script section. And you can actually go like and look at what it's doing under the hood. It's been really cool.
Yeah, I know what alphabetical order means.
Y'all like to do.
So let's see if there's a JavaScript specific answer. What does W3 Schools say?
Love W3.
Oh, they're not saying this specifically about strings, though. And these are just opinions on the internet. Yeah, I'm actually not sure. Here we go. Maybe MDN talks about it. Two strings are strictly equal and they have the same sequence of characters. What else you say about strings? Not much. Well, this is another thing that, like, if I was making this part of my program, I would be playing around with some examples and making sure I get a sense of what's going on.
If you do like capital letters, they're like a lower value.
Yeah, I think that's possibly true. So if I do like that should come after aardvark, but it will come before because it's capital, I guess. Yeah. So even if we put, you know, can't think of another animal with a Z, but there you go. Cool. Was that the last question?
No.
Middleware.
Middleware.
Let's talk about middleware. Is that everybody got filtered down? Sweet. Middleware. So let's talk about this this app. What'd you say? Okay.
He's a middleman you gotta pay every time you gotta go.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. I'm just gonna simplify this app a little bit. All right, so a reminder on express routing. Express routing, every time you say app dot something, get, post, or whatever, anytime you define a route, the order matters, right? So if I have these two routes and I try to go to the home page, I get this route, not this second one. And so if I swap these, now I get that other route, right? So the order matters, okay? So in order to illustrate that, I am going to put, and I recommend you do this too if you're trying to figure this out, console log, you know, the other home page versus, so let's just call this homepage A, and we'll call this homepage B. And so when we go to this page, we should see, we just get homepage A, right? So now there's this next function here, right? So if I call the next function, and I'm just going to call next and return, so this thing doesn't do the next two steps, right? But I'll leave the console here. We're actually going to get homepage B because next tells Express, just keep looking down below me in the list of routes and find the next one that matches, right? So you can do things like have two routes for the same page, and one has some conditional in it where you say, like, you know, if this thing is true, then we actually just want to just say this isn't the right route to handle this request. Go look for another one. Yeah? Yeah, maybe if there's an error, we might call next. There's actually another functionality of next where you can give it an error, and then it'll actually route a little bit differently, but let's not talk about that for this. So we just want to get this order thing down, right? So there's another case for next accepting errors, but we're not going to deal with that. You just need to see that this is coming in as a fixed list, a fixed order, right? So the order matters. So we're matching on two things here. We're matching on the HTTP method as well as the pattern of the path of the request, right? So for example, if we had some more routes here like app.get/books/bookid, and we will call this the books show page. And I'll just tack on the request.params.bookid. So now I go to /books/42 and I get there, and if I were to go to some other number, I go there, right? So now we've got a little bit of dynamic routing. So what if I have another route called /books/new. Right? And I try to go to /new. This is actually going to the book show page, and it's taking new as the book ID, right? So this, even though this pattern is, I guess, more strictly matches, this pattern matched as well. So, and it was first, right? So if you needed some setup like this, the solution would be put this route first, right? So that new goes to the new page, and then if it doesn't match new strictly, then it goes to the next route, right? So order matters here, right?
Could you have also, like what you were saying before,
Yep.
an if statement where you said
Totally.
like,
This
if
is actually, thank
book
you.
ID-
This is a great example. So we could say if this does not match a regular expression that says it is entirely numbers, then call next and return. So now, am I missing a paren or something? No. Oh, sorry. This is the book. If it does not match, got to flip the case here, right? So books new goes to the new page now, and if it's a number, it goes to the show page, right? So that's another way we could have solved it. Thank you. That's a great observation. Cool. So are we seeing how this ordering stuff happens, right? Cool. So here's our piece of middleware that we have right now. Okay, a piece of middleware is exactly like this. It's a function that is called with request, response, and next, right? So for example, I can do app.use, and I can say request response.next, and I'm going to console.log first middleware, and then I'm going to call next. I'm actually going to put this above the body parser just so that it actually is the first middleware. So we go to this page, and we see I got first middleware logged, and then I go to the book show page. If I go to any page, the home page, first middleware is going to get logged, because the way that this middleware is set up, as well as body parser, is it just for every single request. It's the first thing in the list, and it gets called first, right?
Someone in the chat earlier said that anything that uses app.use is middleware. Is that really what that
Yes, yes, it's considered middleware. And here's the difference, right? You don't have to put a path part here. You can just use this function, and it will get called for every single request as long as it gets to that middleware, right? So this is the very first thing in our list, in our route stack, and it's a middleware, so it calls for everything. So every single request will get this. Every single request will also get body parser. Yeah.
So typically you have like authentication or something.
Yeah, right, right. But now on
probably a session.
Sure, yeah, to decode your session cookie or to deal with auth or whatever, right? But so auth is a good example. So let's say we needed a piece of middleware that's going to say you're logged in or you're not logged in or whatever, right? That's going to decide that, right? I can put a piece of middleware after a route. And that means if this route handles the request, we won't get to this middleware. So this will be middleware right after homepage route, yeah? So if I go here, we get first middleware right after homepage route, and then the route that handles it. But if I go to the homepage, oh yeah, the homepage is doing this this next thing. So let's just go back to having one homepage route here, yeah? So if I go to the homepage, I get first middleware, but I don't, this handles it, so we don't keep going down the list, so we don't get to this middleware, okay? So that order matters. So let's say the homepage doesn't care whether you're logged in or not. We might put our authentication check after routes that don't care if you're logged in, but before routes that do care if you're logged in, right?
Would you recommend doing that, or is there like a way that maybe you could store every middleware in a variable and then just call that middleware?
Yeah, there's a way we could do that, right? So let's get a little bit more specific then. Let's say we have a function called render error if not logged in. And this is going to look at, I'm going to fake this because I don't have auth set up. So instead of actually checking if you're logged in, I'm going to actually just check to see if the request query includes logged in. If that's true, we will go to the next route. Else, we will just respond here. Respond.status 400 authentication error, and then we'll send you're not logged in. Cool. So I have this render if not logged in. I'll put this, let's put this up here before any of our routing. And so I'm going to put this right after the body parser. So it's going to be before the home page and everything. So if I go to the home page, it's going to, oh yeah, query doesn't work that way. Let's change it to, let's say, if query logged in is a truthy value, logged in. So if I go here, you're not logged in. But if I say $ logged in equals 1, now I can go to these routes. So that's fake login, right? Forget the query part of it. But you can see that this piece of middleware, and I'll put a log here, console.log, checking auth, right? You can see that if I go to any one of these pages, the checking auth middleware gets called because it's the third thing in our stack, and it's the third middleware, and it matches all routes. So every single request is going to go through here, right? So it's going to block. If I try to go to books/12, that'll work, but not if I have a if logged in is not there. Then the routing stops. It goes to checking auth and it doesn't hit next, which means we don't see any more of our routing, right?
I was more curious though, like if there's a way to, instead of having this middleware act on everything, to only have it act on one request.
Thanks for bringing that back, right? So if I take off this middleware, here's another way you can use middleware in routing, which you can say, let's say book/new required you to be logged in. You can actually pass multiple functions to app.get and app.post, and it will run them in series. So it's a little bit of like a kind of a horizontal part of the tree, right? We've got top to bottom as we define them. But if I define something like this, if it matches books new, it's going to call this, and then this will be the next thing in the route, right? So now I can go to the home page. It doesn't care about auth. I can go to books/some number. It doesn't care about auth. But if I go to new, it cares that I am, God damn it. What? All right.
Google didn't like that you weren't signed in.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so it doesn't care that I'm at the home page. It doesn't care if I go to books 12. But if I try to go to books new, it says I'm not logged in unless I say logged in, unless I, sudo am logged in. So that's another way that you can kind of do middleware, but just for one route, right? So you might name this requires login or something like that, or must be authenticated or something like that, right?
So
there's one
URL encoded right there.
Which one now?
URL encoded. So after you have app.use, I've seen that URL encoded actually.
You mean the body parser?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen it actually used as the.
Yeah, you can do that too, right? You can take this thing here, and if we only needed to to parse the body for one request, we could stick that there, and then it would call that first. So basically, app.get takes a path expression and then any number of handlers, and it'll call them in order, as long as each one calls next to get to the next one, and each one has the opportunity to not call next and just respond to the request, right? So you can either say, like, I know what to do, we're done, or I've done my part, go to the next thing. Cool. The only other thing to say about middleware is that you can do things like let's say we had like a namespace for authentication. So we could say app.use/books, and now this is actually kind of like book/star in some sense, right? This is app.use, when given a string as its first argument, considers that to be a different kind of path expression that really just says, if the path starts with this, call this middleware.
Could you just do app.use and then the string and the asterisk and just run it on everything?
This will run it on anything that starts with /books. No asterisk is required.
I'm saying if you took off books.
Well, if I take off books, then yeah, that's what we've been doing this whole example, right? This is for every route. Yeah. Yeah. So our body parser, everyone's used to this code. If we only need to body parse for our API, right? That's the prefix to all of our API routes. Now we're only doing body parser for the API routes, right? Cool. So for example, so another example is if you needed even more is like, just like I showed you before, if you wanted to do authentication just for this, we could add that there. It'd be the same as if we said app.use for /book/new. It's almost the same, except if we had another route down here that was like /new/ whatever, it would also catch for that, right? Because it's the prefix thing. Does that make sense?
So, so a handler function is something that will just pass through a middleware.
A handle function?
No, a handler function. Earlier you said like it's a handler, the one you pass through the middleware.
I don't remember saying handler. Sorry.
You said a handler.
I
thought you said handler. A handler is a function you pass after the route. I mean,
Oh, I see. Yes. Sorry. This function handles any routes that match this path expression. Yes.
Okay. So,
yes.
So that's a specific term, handler. That's just.
I don't know that that's a specific term, but handler might. I don't know what Express wants you to call these functions, or even if they decide to give them a name. I just called them that.
Sure.
Sorry, it's not a technical term.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, it's a good question. What's up?
So what an accurate description of what middleware is something like an action or process that takes place between the request and the response?
Yes, although I'd want to be more specific, and I would say. So it's any step in your application process that isn't responsible for responding to the request is another way to say it, right? So body parser doesn't respond to our request at all. It is part of the request handling process. Comes in, body parser will look at it. If there's a body that needs parsing, it'll do it. Either way, it's going to go next to whatever's next, right? So we might have 5 or 6 middlewares that say, do I need to do this? Do I need to do auth? Great, I'll do it next. Do I need to parse the body? Great, I'll do it next. Do I need to do something else? Maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't, but either way, I'm calling next, right? So you're just doing intermediary steps before we ultimately get to something that is going to actually send the response. And now middleware can respond, but it's in the middle between in the happy path of things, it's in between the request coming in and the thing that's actually going to formulate and send the response back to that request. It happens in the middle. Yeah.
In general, is middleware a term that so we're using this in reference to Express. In general, is middleware a widely used term where it's just a thing in the middle?
No, middleware came from this whole way of structuring web applications. From my memory, and there may have been some earlier cases of this, came from a library in Ruby called Rack. And Rack was set up to make writing things to handle web requests as easy as writing a function, right? So you can just write a function that takes request, response, and next, and now you're compatible with this very scalable, very like large routing system, right? So it meant to boil everything down to just apps can just be single functions, right? And so that was borrowed from the Ruby community in the early days of Node in a library called Connect, I think. And so Connect has this concept built into it, and Express is built on top of Connect. I assume there's been ports of this kind of idea or structure of how to structure a web app to things like Python, but I don't know. And it might have even come from an earlier language like a Perl app or a PHP thing or something, but I don't have that history yet. Cool. But I don't know of the word middleware being used in a web development outside of these kinds of web server frameworks.
Middleware, it's a function that runs server side between your request and server, like as far as like a definitive definition to give somebody if they want
Yeah.
to
I mean, it has nothing to do, or like I wouldn't even mention server side and client side. It only lives in the server side world, right? So as a request comes to your web server, it is some step that happens between receiving that request and ultimately responding to that request. And it's generally not the thing responsible for responding. It's just some step in the middle, like parsing the cookie or parsing the body or doing anything else that you need as like a pre work before you can actually do what the real meat of responding, right? So for example, if you have 25 routes that all require you to be logged in, every single one of those routes is probably going to want the data for the current user. So we're going to have a piece of middleware that says, before we even get to these things that are going to handle all these different kinds of requests, we need to look up the user and put it on either the request or the response objects and then call next so that the subsequent routes can use the current user's first name, username, email to do their job, right? So that's an example of middleware.
So does it allow you to manipulate the request and the response object?
Yes, a standard practice, at least within Express, is to modify either the request or the response object. That's the only way a piece of middleware can communicate to a subsequent handler, a subsequent piece of middleware, or a subsequent actual route handler, is that, so body parser, for example, creates request.body. And that's not there before body parser puts it there. Cool. That's all the time we have. Thanks, everybody.